Yeah, so as Jamie was saying, he was nice enough to invite me out here to give a little presentation about my company, Fresh with Edge. And so it was nice to be able to have the opportunity to be able to introduce myself to the community here. As I was telling a few people, I think I've given this presentation probably about 300 times, but it's all in little sections at the farmer's market primarily to different people that are asking questions about it. So we'll see how it goes when it's all rounded into one big idea. I'll try and keep it relatively short. This is what I've been doing for the last 4 years, 3 years, well, 4 years now. So I could probably go on some tangents, but I'll try and keep that to a minimum. But so yeah, what Jamie was talking about there is it's an agricultural-based business. I raise hydroponically and aquaponically grown herbs and greens here in the Rochester community. And if you're not familiar with those two terms, we'll get into that a little bit later. But basically what the idea is, we're trying to grow the freshest, the most nutritious, locally grown, sustainable herbs and greens for this community. And we're all focused hyper-local. Everything that we do can't go much beyond 20, 30 miles from here. And that's where we're trying to focus because we see there's the demand here with this community. It's something that's unique to this community as far as having that agricultural background. It's a really rural community, but at the same time having the means to fund something like this where we're a little bit ahead as far as being something that is a mainstream thing, but the industry is catching up in a lot of different areas, and so we're just enjoying the ride so far. So we'll get a little bit into kind of how it started out. So just to kick it off, like any big idea, this is a story of Fresh with Edge. So the story of Fresh, and it all starts with the inspiration, right? So the inspiration really goes back, and you can see that's my family there. My son Griffin eating his raw peppers that he's just turned into a little foodie already. But so the idea was when my wife and I were coming on to our own, we were just gotten married a little while previous, and we started really looking at what we were eating, right? So we were talking about starting a family, and one of the first things is, just kind of taking an assessment of where you're at right now, right? And for us, the food was one of the really first things that we were really concerned about. And so there was trying to figure out, how we can eat better, how we can support something as far as ourselves and the environment around us that's really making it better for us and for everyone involved. And so that's really how it started. And like I always like to tell everybody, really at a certain point, it's just from watching way too many documentaries, right? I love watching documentaries, and once you get into that space, there's a lot of information out there and a lot of people that are trying to tell you what's going on. So beyond the documentaries, it's a lot of research to figure out what we can do. And so that's where we really started with the preparation of it. And so researching what kinds of things that we saw were issues in the system as far as the food system as a whole. And primarily with the food system, it really comes down to the distribution models that are out there, the prices and how that works. And so then those are kind of tied hand in hand. So we'll kind of start out there with the distribution. As most people know, especially if you're into herbs and greens, greens are primarily all grown out of either northern Mexico or southern California. That's just where the majority of them come from. That's how it works. They can have huge economies of scale and ship those everywhere to get them to any location they need to. And so what they've really turned it into is more of a commodity market, right? So it's not something where we're valuing the product itself, the nutrition of it. It's a head of lettuce, and this head of lettuce is the same as that head of lettuce, and everything heads out the door, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take a little bit of a step back from that. And now we're more concerned about, what is the nutritional value of that? And when you talk about distribution from those types of distances, nutrition automatically just starts going down. As soon as you harvest something, as soon as you harvest any greens, as soon as it's cut, you're starting the clock on that, right? So when you get to any big box store that you're bringing that produce into, you've got at least 2-3 days, even in your best distribution model, to be able to get that, especially at this location. And then however long it's sitting on the shelves there into your home, however long it's sitting in the fridge, by the time it's finally hit your plate, your window there as far as how much nutrition you're getting out of that is collapsed down quite a bit. And so that's where we're really taking a step back, looking at that, looking at the environmental impacts and kind of tying all that together The environmental impacts, as far as a lot of that data, just kind of got really small, so it's hard to see. But what it's talking about here is the environmental impact of wasted food. So you can see up there on the top left, 40% of all the produce produced here in the U.S. goes directly to food waste. It doesn't make it to the end consumer. If it does make it to the end consumer, they aren't able to get it to their plate because it rots in the fridge like a lot of our food does. And that again goes back to the price, right? Now that we're paying, the numbers are around 7% of our salaries are paid out to what we eat, which is down from somewhere around 30% 30 years ago. Just that difference, people just aren't as concerned with, being able to keep their food fresh. They'll just go back and get some more. And so then at the same time, 1/4 of all fresh water is used for wasted food. And so if you think about that, I mean, that's just the food that's wasted. You're a little bit over half of the fresh water is used to produce all of the produce out there, and all of the food out there. And so that's something that, there's a lot of concerns there from the environmental side of it. And then getting back to the health impacts. And so that's, going back to the nutritional side of things. So once we had the research, we were talking about, what can we really do about it? Being that we come from, both my wife and I come from a tech background. I'm actually a web developer for the Mayo Clinic full time, so that's what funds all of this. We don't really we have an agrarian background further back in our family, but we grew up on a farm long time ago. We live in town. What can we really do about this? How can we help out more than just shopping at our local food co-op, going to the farmer's market to get our produce? And that's where we turned to aquaponics. And so aquaponics is just a form of hydroponics. And so to start that out, hydroponics is a production of food without the use of a soil substrate. And so in standard growing, you're growing the food in the dirt, and the dirt's really providing you with a couple of primary things. Primarily it's just the structure, though, for the roots to be able to grow in to support the plant. After that, they're getting their nutrients from the water, the liquid that's passing by their roots. And so with the hydroponic method of growing, we're just removing the dirt out of that model and sending the nutrients right to the roots and then cycling that back through. And so all of that water that was used to produce a head of lettuce, now we're using about 10% of that water to be able to grow that same head of lettuce, because when the nutrients and the water flows past the roots, it doesn't get just one chance to go past before it heads down the waterways into the Gulf of Mexico. Now it gets multiple times to go through there and be able to use all of the nutrients up. And with aquaponics, building on top of hydroponics, the method, and you can kind of see the obligatory picture that you have to show with aquaponics whenever you're explaining it. Up on the top right corner there is the fish the fish food going to the fish. And so when you talk about aquaponics, it's a combination of aquaculture into it. So now we're using the fish to produce the nitrogen source for growing of your greens and herbs. So any leafy green, the primary nutrient that they need is nitrogen. And so when you feed the fish, ammonia gets excreted from the fish. And that ammonia is something, when you have a fish tank at home, that's the thing that you have that filter there to remove out, is the ammonia, because that eventually becomes toxic to the fish. Well, in commercial aquaculture, their big thing back in the 70s was trying to figure out a way, okay, if we're not just passing this water through the fish and sending it off, what's some way that we can be a little bit more sustainable with the amount of water we're using to produce fish? And so that's where that recirculating system, if they're recirculating that water past a fish, they have to have some way to remove out the ammonia. And that's where aquaponics came in, is they take the hydroponic form of growing produce and now remove out that nitrogen, that ammonia, through a process that converts nitrogen into a form that the plants are able to take up. And so that's basically how aquaponics works. And so when we took aquaponics, we knew we wanted to focus that in, how can we apply that to the local community here? And so we were looking at, how can we differentiate our product from what everybody else is producing? And that's where we were looking at keeping it hyper-local, like we talked about before, really being concerned with the freshness, the nutritional value of what you're getting from that product. And so we had a little bit of an aha moment when we were at the Aquaponics Association Conference 2012 back in Denver, where we met this gentleman, Dr. Nate Story. He has a PhD in agronomy, and his PhD is based in aquaponics, but the form of aquaponics was this new form, these vertical hydroponic towers, and you can kind of see a little bit of an example of it there, where you've got these towers, and you can see it in a retail display that are growing the produce out of the front of this tower. And so we plant the seedlings into this tower, we can grow them in our system, we disconnect it, and this was something that he was really talking about, you know, as far as being able to save space, because he's growing them all vertically here. And you know, the first thing that when I talked to him about it, the first thing that I thought of is, well, you know, how can we, you know, is there a way we can just disconnect this from the system? Can you bring it to the farmer's market or something without, you know, without harvesting it first? And so he said, well, come on back, and, you know, I've got this new thing I'm working on, and he showed me a picture of this display here. It was that picture there. It's the display in their local food co-op, and that was really, to me, that was, you know, that's it. That's the aha moment where I said, all right, that's what we're going to do, because now we have something, we can bring this in, and that's what we've been doing, is we bring this into the farmer's market, we bring it into we had it in for a couple months at the food co-op, where we'll be going back here this spring, and that's something that, with being able to bring that product to market alive, that's what's really touching on all of those bases, right? So now we have something that we started out last year with 60 towers, and that's what we refer to those white channels that you see there that we're growing the produce out of. We started with 60 towers, and really what we wanted to do with that small run was just to be able to show, still at a commercial scale, are we able to do it, right? I mean, we had never done a full-blown aquaponics facility before. Like I was saying, I have a background in web development, so really to be able to convert that into being a farmer for the most part, you know, that's a little bit of a stretch, but that's why we wanted to be able to prove it to ourselves. Yeah, we can grow this. Yeah, we can sell this. You know, there's actually a market for it here. People will understand it and enjoy it. And so that's where we started. And I really got credit, for the most part, working with the food co-op from day one, well, from before day one, talking with Scott Weaver, the produce manager there, more than accepting, as far as we just went there with the idea and said, hey, this is what we think we're going to do. This is what we're going to try and do. We're going to see if it works. You know, is this something that you'd be, you know, we're not looking for a, yeah, let's do it, but, you know, would you be interested in possibly allowing that to come in? And from day, you know, negative one, they've been more than accepting and more than happy to bring it in there. And so we worked through the entire process, you know, proving it out at the farmer's market, and then last fall getting into the food co-op. And we've had a great response from both of those venues. And so now this year, this is kind of where we're at now, the business as it stands. We've expanded out to 280 towers. We're producing, going back to the farmer's market, and actually I just got called today that we might be we should be a full-time vendor there, so we'll have the same spot every week. And then we're heading back to the People's Food Co-op, so we're going to have our display back in there. And then also we're moving into restaurants and in-home environments. So restaurants, the big idea there, and it's been beautiful. For us, the farmer's market was really the key to this, of being able to show a chef, you know, this is what we're doing with live produce. As soon as they see that visual, and that's what I pretty much required that I could have a, you know, a display here to be able to show you guys what's going on here, is if they can see how it's working and what's happening, they automatically have the same response of being able to bring that in. And now this is a green wall they can have in their restaurant, be able to harvest some herbs off of, you know, maybe have some greens in the back, some leafier greens in the back that they can harvest the fresh produce from, and being able to offer their clientele the absolute best product and best ingredients for what they're trying to create. So we've had a great response from some of the restaurants here in town, and even up in Pine Island, that we're working with and we'll be going into this summer. And then we have the in-home displays, which are a new concept that we're working on, which is, if you're familiar with the CSA, where basically you're bringing multiple different types of produce into the home every week. It's something similar to that, where we're not going to structure it all out, but be able to offer people a full tower basically of produce that sits in a reservoir out on their deck or on their patio at their apartment, that they can have produce there without having to have a garden and be able to have that all throughout the summer. So that's where we're at currently, and then in the future, we're heading towards year-round production. There's some ingenuitive ways that we're trying to go about that to make that possible, as far as even working with the county here to be able to take advantage of some of their waste heat to be able to heat a greenhouse. Possibly we're looking at that as an option, which is really, you know, the final key as far as getting production all throughout the year, or possibly even move it indoors. There's some places up in the Twin Cities that are doing that as well. And then along with possible partnerships that we're working on, and that's always, you know, the continual process that we're working through, along with some software, being that I have a little bit of software development background. There's a lot of record keeping, a lot of numbers that need to be involved with the science that we have to track through. And then I always put on here, I'll tell you more tomorrow, because every day it evolves, every day it changes, every day something new comes up, and so that's what, you know, being able to talk to an entire group like this, be able to present what we're doing, there's always great connections with this entrepreneurial community that we're always able to track something new down of maybe able to do something else. So I appreciate you all taking the time to hear our story and learn a little bit more about us. You know, if you want to ask questions, we can always cover them now or do them later in person. However you want to do it. So, and like I said, if you want.
Are you doing this on a city lot inside of Rochester? These
Oh,
towers?
Yeah, good question. I probably should include that. So if you've heard of, have you heard of Squash Blossom Farm? They're out on the northwest side of town, out by Douglas. That's where we started out our aquaponics setup. They're basically heading towards Douglas on the corner of 60th and 75th. They have a little 10-acre farm, and we set up in their high tunnel. So we have tilapia out there that we ran through the summer. We've got catfish just hanging out, waiting for spring right now. And that's the fish that we're using for the aquaponics. And we're going to be moving back, or we're going to be going back there for the aquaponics side of things this summer. And then we have another greenhouse that's built specifically for this, north of Byron, just north of Oxbow Park. That we're doing the hydroponic side of things. So we're doing a little bit in both locations, just working with what we can do as far as getting electrical in and all that exciting stuff. But yeah, so it's all hyper local to the community here. And then in the future, we're hoping to even move even closer into town, depending on what we can work out. Like I said, I live in town, so I don't really have my own property to be doing this. So I've been just kind of a greenhouse vagabond with people that are kind enough to allow us to rent some space and set things up. So that's what we've been doing so far.
How long did you say you've been doing this?
Well, we started out, plan started around 2010 with, and I'm kind of one of those individuals that has to try and figure out every way that it's going to fail before I get started on something. And I was able to convince myself out of all of those, and then we started up production just last year. So our first run of towers started in June of last year, and it's been a fairly chaotic expansion since then. We stopped production about November of last year, just when it started to get cold basically, and then we're kicking things back up. I've got all my seedlings that are coming in. I just got the notice that I have some coming from Michigan right now, so we'll be producing all throughout summer.
So you think you're gonna keep the full-time gig?
Yeah, this isn't.
Or are you gonna make the break, or
the beauty of
that transition, you know? And then,
yeah, well, that's the thing with the beauty of, well, a couple of different things. You know, working at Mayo Clinic, it's a great, you know, especially in the area that I work in, it's a great venue to be able to keep that full-time salary there, to be able to support this. And when you talk to the entrepreneurs, especially, that everybody talks about, you know, getting addicted to that salary and trying to cut that addiction to be able to go out on your own. And so we're still not there yet. I've got the young family at home. I've actually got I've got Griffin up there, and then my wife's due at any time here. So there's a lot that's depending on that salary still at this time. And you know, kind of the beauty of agriculture, it's kind of a small numbers game to begin with until you can really figure out your ways to be able to make it work. And there's plenty of opportunities there, but then that's the plan, but it's probably still at least, depending on how everything works out, at least 1.5 years, 2 years out. So.
I guess you might have gotten in a little bit. I was just curious a little bit of the business model, and you don't have to give actual costs or what you're kind of charging clients or anything, but just you talk about these towers and then at the farmers market, how you're gonna essentially make money over the long term with it.
Yeah, and so that's something that last year we were just ballparking it, throwing stuff out there, and that's the other beauty of having a full-time job. You can get by with that. I would have been hungry, poor, and homeless if I wouldn't have had a full-time job last year. So so that's where we started things out. This year, being that we had the hard numbers of what it took to produce, we could break it all down through. I have a spreadsheet upon spreadsheet, and that's where the software comes in to hopefully eventually replace all of that. Basically, here's everything that it takes to produce, how much, how long something runs in the greenhouse, and so basically how I price everything out is depending on the product, it takes different amount of time to be able to grow it out in those towers. So depending on how long it takes to be in there, that's what I factor out my cost of goods sold, because that takes X amount of dollars to run the greenhouse for X amount of time, right? And so everything is factored off of that. A little bit of demand put in there, and then when I get to the farmers market, it's all sold, and actually everything's sold by the ounce, right? And so at the farmers market, it's directly sold by the ounce. You go up, harvest it, put down, and that's one of the other things as far as food waste side of things. Not only do you have that time that it's not sitting on a shelf after harvesting, it's also only however much you want, right? So you don't need a whole clamshell of something. You harvest it, buy what you need, and you're good to go. Same thing at the food co-op, they do it the same way. So we have our PLUs, you throw this tag on there. And that's a great thing with the food co-op as well, is everybody's used to doing bulk purchasing there, right? It's kind of something that you're used to. And so we're basically just bulk live produce. And so you harvest however much you want, throw it in a bag, same deal there. And then as far as the restaurants are concerned, that's more of, we have, I forget the term there, but it's basically, here's how much we always estimate. So it's sold as like a bunch. And so like kind of a bunch is a restaurant term as far as, this is about how much it is. It's not exact, but about how much it is every single week. And so we just charge them a set rate on that. And then we always adjust that according to however much we can produce. That's what the plan is anyways. This is the first year we do that. So.
Question. You said your background is in web development, or yeah? Okay.
Yep.
I'm not an IT person, so I want to make sure I got that right. Do you have a background in agriculture? What's been the hardest challenge for coming up with an idea that's not something that you're very knowledgeable about, or maybe you have an idea? I'm sure a lot of people have ideas, but they're like, well, I'm not going to start that because I don't have any background in that. What's been the hardest part or interesting thing that you've come across?
That's a good question. The biggest thing for me, the advantage that I saw in my background is during web development, I spend my entire day researching things online to figure out how to do something. That's the beautiful thing about the web development community is we figure out how to do something, and usually whenever you're doing something, it's the first time of figuring it out, and then you send that out to the community. This is how I did it, right? And so I spend my entire day looking through online channels to be able to pull information out. And that's basically the same thing what I've done with this company is I've just researched the heck out of it. And that's where the 2 years where it was happening, it was literally a daily process where I just spent all my time researching and then also building up those connections. And so Dr. Nate Story, the one that I was talking about there that invented this product, I've been on the phone with him, been in conference calls with him, been through emails, and so he's basically who I refer to as my mentor. He has the agronomy knowledge, right? And being able to find somebody like that to mentor you through it, and so I think that really applies. Both of those things really apply anywhere, right? So if you have the ability to be able to search that information, especially in the age of the internet, the information's out there, right? You just got to be able to figure out how to find it. So if you can figure out how to find it, you can track down a good mentor to be able to be able to help you when that sometimes that information is tough to tell what's legit and what isn't. And so having somebody that can really tell you what the hard science behind it is.
Do you go to some sort of mirroring system or something like that, where you actually could get maybe another month of operation?
What type of system? I'm sorry.
Well, as winter approaches in Minnesota, the sun, you have less sun, and that's at more of an angle to the horizon. But it's also, because our atmosphere is so clean, it's actually fairly strong. So there's a lot of energy in it. Have you ever considered maybe adding to your greenhouses and mirrors or something like that that would reflect more energy back in, and maybe hit a water system or something like that to bring up its temperature? Yeah, a passive kind of thing, because I think it might be economical. Because I got to believe that if you could have fresh produce in December, that you could charge a premium for that versus having fresh produce in July.
Yep. And so there's actually good examples as far as the passive solar way of doing things. There's an individual, and I can't recall his name offhand, out in Lake City, who has a great passive solar greenhouse. What's his name? Norm? Yeah, Norm, exactly, yeah. So he has a great example. He had some granting, or a grant that I gave a small portion of the money to be able to do that, but then the beautiful thing about a grant is then they put all the information out there on how it's done. So I mean, the information is there, the resources are there to do something like that. And then as far as the light management, that's another thing with these towers that are developed. Nate's located up in Wyoming, and so he has, or down in Wyoming, he has relatively the same amount of light throughout the year as what we do, and so that's something with these towers. And I don't know if we can go back, but there's there we go. Being that we actually grow them, and you can see there, we actually grow them at the angle there. And so they're growing vertically, and that's another thing in the summertime when the sun's over top, and a lot of times you don't want all of that light that's on your produce.
Too much.
Yeah, exactly. You actually have some shading from some of your produce to be able to help out your product. But then in the wintertime, when that angle's down here, now you're facing directly to it instead of growing horizontally, so you're taking advantage of all that light there as well. For us, and really what it comes down to then is just the amount of hours in a day that certain plants require. With the basil, it's 12 hours in a day, and we're done with 12 hours getting close to October, and then it doesn't start back up until, I want to say the numbers are April until we start getting that again. And so it's just that amount of time during the day to be able to get it. And so we've been looking at a couple of different things as far as doing it at a larger commercial scale. It gets a little bit difficult doing some of those passive type of operations, but really the most reasonable route that we've seen so far that we're going to try and pursue this year is working with the county. And that's what I alluded to a little bit there, is being able to use some of their waste heat that they put out from their waste energy facility and be able to pump that through the greenhouse. And if you have an economical source of heat energy, that's really the biggest thing. Light's kind of a smaller issue because of the fact that LED lighting is really bringing that up to a point. So that's what we've been working on. So there's a lot of things to be able to make all of that work, but that's the routes that we've gone so far.
All right, I'm going to have to catch up.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.